On May 22nd, 1999, I gave up many of the rights that I valued as a free American citizen. I gave up the right to make my own decisions about my life. I gave up my right to sleep through loud noises. I gave up my right to any money I might ever earn. I gave up the right to have my friends come over to the house and play video games till 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. I gave all that up, even the right to leave my underwear in the bedroom floor. I gave all that up because on May 22nd, 1999, Kathleen and I were married. And I may have given up some of my rights, but I didn't have to do that. I could have not shown up at the church. That would have been a dirtbag move, but I could have not shown up at the church. I had that right. I did have the right to change my mind, but I didn't. Why didn't I? Why did I give up the right to eat peanut butter out of the jar and drink milk from the carton? Kathleen was worth it. Kathleen was worth it. She was more important to me, and is more important to me, than my right to drink milk out of the carton. I don't even like milk all that well. I mean, think about it. We're the only mammals on the planet that drink milk outside our infancy, and even then, we drink it from other species. It's really pretty gross when you think about it, but that's not the point. The point is, she is worth it to me to lay that right down. To spend the rest of my life with her was worth laying those things down. And the problem with that sentiment is that it isn't really shared by the rest of the world. Too few people are willing to lay down their rights. In fact, every day in America, you can't pick up a newspaper or turn on the TV or even go to get on Facebook without somebody just barking about the rights of some other group. It's just over and over and over and all the time. Some people fight for the right for an abortion. Some people fight for the right of the unborn baby to have a chance at life. Some people fight for the right of homosexuals to marry. Some people fight for the right of the state to decide what defines a marriage. People fight for the right to a government handout. Other people fight for the right to keep what they've earned. PETA fights for animal rights. The ACLU fights for liberal rights. The Beastie Boys fight for the right to party. It's just, everybody's fighting for rights. But these are the issues that the rest of the world deals with. In the church, we don't deal with that too much because we've already given everything to Jesus. Everything but our paycheck because we're saving for a boat. Everything but our time because, well, I didn't get to sleep in yesterday, so I'm going to sleep in today, or I'm going to mow the grass before kickoff. We give everything to Jesus except a few little things. Maybe we get up a little earlier, like I said, to get into kickoff, but whatever it is, we think that we have rights that we need to hold on to, and we tend to fight for our right to keep it, whether you're a follower of Christ, whether this is your first time in a church, regardless of anything about you, we all fight to hang on to our rights. And no matter who we are, where we came from, no matter our walk of life, too few of us are willing to lay those rights down. Like I said, 14 years ago, I was willing to lay down my right to leave the underwear in the middle of the floor because Kathleen, spending the rest of my life with Kathleen, was worth it. And if what she tells me is true, I'm happier now than I've ever been. Yeah, thank you all for laughing at that. When a mother lays down her right to an abortion, a family is blessed with a new baby. When a father lays down his right to watch the stock ticker and spend some time with his kids, he tells them that they're more important. You see, when we willingly lay down our rights, it can be a beautiful thing. There are some things that are more important than our rights. Constitutionally, we're guaranteed rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. There's some purposes in the world, though, that are more important than our inalienable rights. And we see this with Paul and Silas in Acts chapter 16. Now, last week, if you'll remember, we were still in Acts chapter 16, and Paul and Silas had cast out a demon from a slave girl. This slave girl The demon in the slave girl was able to predict the future, and the men who owned this girl were making a lot of money. And Paul and Silas cast this demon out and ticked these guys off, and so they brought charges against Paul and Silas, went to the magistrate, and Paul and Silas were stripped, beaten, and then thrown in jail. What you might not know about that situation, however, is that it didn't have to happen. In this situation, Paul and Silas chose to lay down their rights, and they accepted the punishment they were given. Today, as we study Acts 16, we're going to answer the question, why would anyone lay down their rights? But before we do that, let's go to the Lord in prayer. Father, again, we come to you just humbled that you love us enough to die in our place. Lord, help us to understand what our rights are in you. God, help us to know that your glory is more important than our rights. Help us to be wise in choosing when to assert those rights. Help us to hear the lessons from your word this morning. It's in your name I pray. Amen. All right, so if you haven't already, go ahead and turn to Acts 16. And like I said, last time we were together, we looked at Paul and Silas and how they were thrown in jail. And we talked about how God used their godly response to suffering to lead the jailer to the Lord. And this week, as we continue the story, we find Paul and Silas are receiving some good news from the magistrates that punished them. So let's begin reading in verse 35 in Acts 16. When daylight came, the chief magistrates sent the police to say, "Release those men." The jailer reported these words to Paul. "The magistrates have sent orders for you to be released. So come out now and go in peace." So Paul and Silas, with their new friend, the jailer was the guy that they led to the Lord, led the jailer to the Lord, led his household to the Lord, and here he comes running into the prison and says, "Hey guys, the guys who stripped you, beat you, and threw you in jail say you can go now. Hit the bricks." Now, we would expect Paul and Silas to breathe a sigh of relief here and kind of head right for the door. Don't want any more of what we had. It's time to get. But that's not what happens. Take a look at how Paul responds in verse 37. But Paul said to them, "They beat us in public without a trial, although we are Roman citizens, and threw us in jail. And now they're going to smuggle us out secretly? Certainly not. On the contrary, let them come themselves and escort us out." So as I studied this, I was like, wait a second. Paul, it's time to shut up and hit the door. Nobody cares that you're a Roman citizen. Go before they pound you again. Turns out being a Roman citizen is actually a pretty big deal. Back in verse 12, we learned that Philippi, which is where they were in prison, Philippi was a Roman colony, one of the leading Roman colonies in that area. And this meant that Philippi functioned as an extension of Rome. And every right and privilege that belonged to a Roman citizen was extended to them in Philippi, and that included the right to a trial. What that meant for Paul and Silas was that they could have avoided the whole naked, beating, thrown in jail thing if they'd have flashed their passport or whatever it was they carried that identified them as Roman citizens. They forwent their rights as Roman citizens and took the punishment. It seems kind of silly to me that Paul and Silas would have taken a beating like that. Didn't know what that accomplished, but as we're going to see, it was actually a very shrewd move on their part. Let's keep reading with verse 38, and we'll get to that. Then the police reported these words to the magistrates. They were afraid when they heard that Paul and Silas were Roman citizens. So they came and apologized to them, and escorting them out, they urged them to leave town. Now, I love this part. When the magistrates found out that Paul and Silas were Roman citizens, they were afraid. And I'd love to have seen the look on these guys' faces when they found this out. It's probably a lot like what my favorite comedian, Brian Regan, points out. He says, it's probably the kind of fear that you experienced when you realized that your science project was due and you hadn't done anything on it in 6 months. Your head pops up off the pillow and all you can do is go, "Oh no." It's probably that kind of fear that these magistrates experienced. They had messed up royally. Violating a citizen's rights could have resulted in the magistrates being removed from office. It could have resulted in the privileges that Philippi enjoyed as a Roman colony being revoked. Even if they hadn't lost their jobs, no magistrate in his right mind is going to want to be in front of the townspeople and say, hey, guess what? I screwed up and you guys no longer get the benefits of being a Roman citizen. It's a big deal. It was a big deal to these guys, and they were in a tight spot. And so that gave Paul the freedom to make the demands that he did. But even so, Paul wasn't being difficult for his own sake. Paul was concerned that his being thrown in prison might be a major hurdle for the church to overcome. It might be a big black mark on his witness. And so he made sure that both he and Silas were publicly vindicated. He wanted to be clear to everyone in Philippi that the entire episode was a result of a mistake on the part of the magistrates, not a result of Paul and Silas being bad guys. He wanted to make sure that everyone understood that. He wanted to make sure that they were men of integrity and that they were above reproach. So Paul was shrewd here. You know, we tend to think of shrewd as being a manipulative kind of used car salesman kind of trait. But it's not. It's not. We as followers of Christ are told to be shrewd. We're told to be as wise as serpents and as gentle as doves, right? Shrewdness is a good thing when you understand how the system works and you can use that to a kingdom advantage. That's okay. That's what Paul does here. In his shrewdness, he laid down his rights as a Roman citizen because he knew that God's renown was more important than his rights. And this is no less true today than it was then. God's glory is more important than our rights.